to mute your Zoom for some time.
If you can mute everybody, no, then you can unmute and speak. That will help because there are many who have not muted.
Oh yeah, Rambai, probably you got to do that because
I'm trying to see if I can do that.
Whoever has hosted the call has the right to mute all.
I was trying that.
And Ram, you can make Swapnil also co-host. Probably.
Yeah, I think that is getting to be, I don't know. I think I'll have to learn more. Technology guys.
There are still people who have not muted.
Yeah, I'm literally doing that. Okay, Swapnil, I think let's start. I think we have to give benefit of people who have joined on time.
Okay. Okay, everyone, can you please mute yourself again?
Go ahead, Swapnil.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you, everyone. I'm Dr. Swapnil Amade from University of Maryland, Baltimore County in Baltimore, USA. So I'm basically a scientist, and this is the kind of event that we are hosting today is completely new to me. Thanks to Ram for giving me this wonderful opportunity to learn and understand something that is really offbeat to me. So today, I would love to thank everyone for joining today. We know that there are lots of challenges in and around us today, and thank you everyone for joining. Now, right away, now this is going to be a short session, and what I'm going to talk a little bit about initially is about authors. So Vignesh is a very young author here, and I'm very impressed that this 25-year-old guy who is, who has a major in law, and also is a student of master students of law in Mumbai. He has this very unique interest in the areas of history. Then we have Mr. Ramaswamy Krishnamani, fondly call him Ram or Rambhai. He has a very interesting profile. So basically, Rambhai he had a career in finance and technology, and now is picking up interest in the areas of history, culture, and fine arts. That is a pretty interesting mix, Ram. So Vignesh and Ram, thank you for introducing this wonderful book. And we're all very excited to pick one copy for ourselves. And I'm sure even after the call, each one of us will find an opportunity to pass on this information to their friends, families, so that everyone has this copy for themselves. Now, history has many different dimensions, and no matter what dimension history has, it's very important for all of us to know about the history, because what we get from history is always some sort of lesson. Now, I must agree for myself that despite being an Indian, I know a little bit more about the global history than what I know of my country, and that is a bit sad part of it. So, but what really excites me about this book, or about books that tell us history, is that it gives me an opportunity to get a very good glimpse of the rich culture and the history that my country had. So we have some very interesting guests today, and if I can just say, we have Dr. Jairam, who is the Vice Chancellor of Pravara Institute of Medical Sciences. Thanks to my friend, Dr. Priya Rao, the principal of Pravara College of Pharmacy, for requesting Dr. Jairam to join in this call. Thank you very much, sir. And Dr. Rao, welcome both of you. I also have my friend, who is a very popular journalist, Aarti Kulkarni, joining in from India. She is a two-time recipient of the very prestigious Ramnath Goenka Award for Journalism in India. She's a she's an environment journalist and also a filmmaker in India. Thank you very much for joining. So before I spend a lot of time, this is over to Vignesh and Ram.
Hey, Vignesh, you want to go first?
Sure. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you very much, guys, for coming and joining us in this book launch, which I and Mr. Ram have. This book is actually very special for us because it's actually our first venture.
214. Successful landing. Flight 214.
Actually, our
next one is coming in.
Okay, could you please all mute yourself? Thank you very much.
1157. A350. Flight 1157. There's a warning sign issued for this aircraft, for this runway right now because of the torrential rains.
Okay, can you please mute yourself? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we can go on, please.
Right. Thank you very much. So as I was saying, this is actually a very special endeavor or venture, as I would call, because it's actually the first out of a series of books that we are going to launch. And I believe history, I'm not talking about just Pallava history, I'm talking about history as a subject is greatly, neglected in our school curriculums, in our daily lives, in everybody's lives. I believe history plays a very major role in the making of a nation, in the making of a society. And when it comes to history, I believe transparency and fairness is required when it comes to reporting of history. So this is an attempt towards that transparent reporting of history, which I believe has not been followed for generations in this country, because frankly speaking, history is a subject which is subject to a lot of prejudice and bias, and hence only a one-sided record of it is available to us. So this, I believe, is an attempt to make it transparent and open to all. And I hope you guys appreciate and learn from this effort. So thank you very much again to my friends, to like-minded people, and to all the brilliant minds who have joined us and who are there in this meeting. So again, you have my appreciation and gratitude. Over to you, Ramama.
Okay, hey, good evening, India. Thanks to a ton of friends. Apart from the friends that Swapnil did call out, I want to make special mention of our friends today. We've got Surya, we've got Avinash, we've got Satish, we've got Srinivas Aranki, Sujata, T.N. Ramkrishnan, S. Ramkrishnan, Padma. We have all basically had a past going back about 45 years. I rarely thought that this would be one more occasion that we would possibly chairing something like this. But thanks for making time and joining us on this particular call. So what we wanted to possibly use this time is, we want to keep the session very interactive. And I think there is a few questions which were sent out, and I think Swapnil, you had a few questions. So I would like to basically see if in case you have any specific format in which we want to take it. We can keep talking about this book, but I wanted to keenly be interested to see if in case we can keep this session as much that you guys ask and we help share whatever little we know, and then we literally go from there.
Absolutely. I mean, it would be very interesting to keep it a little bit informal because it's more of friends and families. And, so Rambai, I have a couple of questions that I got from a lot of friends here. So I'll just throw one question at you, and that's a very obvious question. Why Pallavas? I mean, why did you guys choose this particular topic?
That's an interesting, that's a very interesting question. So when we started with this particular journey, this journey was primarily important. So during the last 3.5 years that we've been basically traveling, we have been able to get across into, we have been traveling across the length and breadth of India. So in the last 4 years that I've been able to travel, I've devoted about 9 to 10 days of devoted travel every year, and we've literally started exploring. We started literally from the Northeast, went all the way. This was primarily to satisfy some interest which I had in trying to look at some temples and some photographs and stuff. Interestingly, 3 years back, I got intrigued into trying to understand localized history, and I started reading Manushi Sinha's book, and she's basically pushed 11 different volumes to try and bring to light the great heroes that we have from every state. So I said, if I have to start, I would rather start from a mother tongue that I've got and then the place where I grew up. So I actually spent a lot of time last year exploring the whole Chhatrapati Shivaji trail in Maharashtra. I, along with about 4 of my friends, we went about to 7 different locations after reading up Professor Mendele's book, which is a 950-page volume on Maharashtra. This is just to say Jai Maharashtra first. And then when I go to the lingo that I speak, which is Tamil, I wanted to explore more about Tamil Nadu. So when I was trying to look at where did it all start, so my exploration went to Cholas. I mean, that's been the most popular ones that everyone knows, because if you look at the east coast of India, it's called the Cholamandalam coast, or the Coromandel coast as it is now called. When I started tracing more about that, found that actually Cholas were there maybe 800 years later. There were Pallavas much before that. And what they contributed to was the way the language was formed, the way the architecture was given shape, how they basically carved out of monoliths, and then contributed to art, culture, and Sanskrit as a language to evolve, with Grantha as a predecessor to it. So that's one of the primary reasons. I know it was a slightly long-winded one, but I wanted to just set the context and the backstory.
Well, absolutely. So one more thing is, I understand, I've been writing a book, being a science writer, and today, there are many scientists, friends of mine over here, and they know what writing is all about. So you need to put in a lot of effort, right? What was the most challenging part of putting in all those efforts? Because let me share one very interesting thing that I saw in Ram when I first met him. I first met Ram at the Library of Congress here in Washington, D.C. And I saw that childlike curiosity in him, trying to find one book over another. And that is something that I really liked about, so Ram, what challenges you guys had, when you were actually trying to dig down those pages of history?
So very interesting point, right? So what ended up happening is that when we were trying to research out some particular books, and there's about series of books like what Vignesh said, these are some of the things that we are literally coming up with. So when you met me at the Library of Congress, I was there actually researching already on how to come about with. So I've seen a lot of my nieces and cousins and friends who have basically been in Bharatanatyam. And I wanted to understand, what does this particular Bharatanatyam actually mean? What does these particular postures say? And I started researching out something on, I said, let's see if in case we can bring out something for a common person to understand what the dance is all about. So that took me to my first step of detailed research, trying to understand the science around it. And what stumped me was I was trying to reach out to a book by Dr. Padma Subramaniam, who's a Padma Vibhushan, and possibly she's God as far as Bharatanatyam is concerned. Guess what? The book in India is not even available. And editions which were available when I was trying to reach out, it was out of print. And that's a contrast because in the US, at least 440 copies of the books are available in every library in every university. So Swapnil, when we met at the Library of Congress, that was the first part of it. And I was actually trying to pick up some stuff because I was I've still not completed the second book, which I started, which is on Khajuraho temples, because that's the next one, which I wanted to finish later this year and bring it out. So one thing led to the other. And from there, the research related ones. And then I came across something which was amazing. There is 2 books societies available in India. One is called the Public Library of India and the Internet.Archives, which basically has close to maybe 2 billion books. And out of that, I downloaded about 65 of them. So we're talking about 65 books with about 30,000 pages. And for this particular book research, it took me to about 6,000 pages over the last 1.5 years. So I don't know if that was an easy way to do it. It's like, trying to find a needle in a haystack. But yeah, we just went through the whole journey on that.
Well, that's a wonderful number, 30,000 pages. Vignesh, if we can hear something from you about your, your experience into this research.
First and foremost, I would say this is a very ambitious project, and I believe we have the capability to pull it off if we receive support from you guys. So thank you very much it's actually a great big step. And now coming to what difficulties I faced when it came to the Pallavas, well, I would say one such difficulty that I faced is there is a lot of obscurity when it comes to Pallava history before the 6th century. Now, what happens is there are several theories when it comes to the origin and how they administered, what they built. Like, for example, if you see, there are in several dynasties, there are always namesakes. As in our protagonist dynasty itself, if you see, there are 2 Narasimhavarmans, there are 2 Mahendravarmans. And so what happens is when they recorded their exploits, due to their exploits happen to be near the seashore. So you see, it's subject to elements like wind, water, and time. And time is the greatest element which basically leads to obscurity in history. So historians have actually struggled to put a timeline as to which king built what. It is after a lot of research, after a lot of digging, quite literally. I'm not just talking about words or documents. It's not just about scouring documents. I'm talking about literally digging up sand in the city of Mamallapuram to uncover secrets. Archaeologists do dig and they do find stuff, but what we see actually in Mamallapuram is just a layer of history. It's the tip of the iceberg, quite literally, because I believe everyone believes that 3/4 of what is undiscovered is still hidden behind layers and layers of sand. So when we wrote this book, we merely had books which our great historians wrote. So when we ended up writing, I had to cross-reference several books to get my facts correct. And we need more exploration in this subject, because these protagonists, these Pallavas who we see, they are not just any dynasty. They are basically a gateway to the greater literature, to the greater history of South India, which has long been neglected in the overall history of India. So if you learn about the Pallavas, you can basically establish several links to other dynasties, and when a map is created, it allows future generations also to discover more about this dynasty, and it builds an overall picture for us as to who were the Pallavas, what did they do, where did they come from. I mean, their origin itself is practically unknown. We still don't know like we know that, you know, the Maurya, amazingly, we know that the Mauryans originated from Chandragupta Maurya, but we know nothing about who was the first Pallava who established this kingdom. We are not able to pinpoint as to who the first king of this kingdom was. And we actually do not even know whether the last one was really the last king of the line, or were there more. So I believe this was a difficulty which we faced when we wrote the book.
It's very interesting, Vignesh. Thank you for summing that up. Now, you know, history could be I mean, this is always a point of debate here, because I'm sure there exists far more literature than one as far as this particular subject is concerned. And it's very obvious that we might end up, you know, if two authors might just end up agreeing on a certain thing, because, you know, this is something that that was built pretty long time back. Now, any challenges, Ram and Vignesh, just wanted to hear this from you. Any challenges that you guys feel were actually when you had to come to a point where you actually had to agree to disagree with other authors?
That's right. So I'm just putting up one page. If you guys are seeing, we have gone very audaciously, challenging Western historians, talking about the time period where Gautam Buddha was born. So this is based on some fantastic research which was done by some archaeology professionals from the state of North Carolina. And that is from one of the most acclaimed archaeologists, basically called Dr. Cunningham. And this was done in Nepal, in a place called Lumbini, which is attributed to the birthplace of Gautam Buddha. And what they found is that in one of the trenches, and to be very precise, trench 5, and I went through the entire archaeological findings and notes that they have published, they found artifacts which relate to Buddha's time, but the carbon dating of that came to something like 1680 BC. So if you are looking at Gautam Buddha's successors, and if you find those carbon dating to be 1680 BC, there is no hope in hell that you can wish that Gautam Buddha was born around 450 BC or 474 BCE, as some of them say. So we thought we should basically put facts out there and then let you, the reader, figure out what could pretty much be the type of time frame. And if you look at this particular nugget, which is in chapter 34, what we have done is we have actually tracked and traced some of the findings that we found for the Jaina monks. So Mahavir, as we know, is the 24th Tirthankara. But if you think that Mahavir was born around 574 BCE, as they are talking about, in Tamil Nadu alone, there are close to 40 Mahavir Jain or Jaina monk temples, including this massive 50 feet height Digambara monk. And the dating for this goes to something like 2nd century CE. In the knowledge base that we have, going back to time, which is more like 2,100 years, or rather roughly 1,900 years, there is no way the information that could have traveled from one part of the country to the other part of the country in literally 400 years. And then they had basically the artisan schools which could come up with such mammoth structures, and see the perfection that is available in these particular structures. This is literally 50 feet in height and goes back to 1 century CE. And then there's a lot of places we found in Madurai as one particular location, something like 40 temples, and these are inscriptions on the walls. And if during a part of the trip last year that we took in Maharashtra and exploring Chhatrapati Shivaji Trail in Maharashtra, very close to Bombay, very close to the Bombay-Pune Expressway, in Lonavala, there is a place called Baja Caves. And in Baja Caves, there are stupas which are done, and there are about 14 of them with the caves. And those particular caves date back to 1st century. Think about it. If Gautam Buddha or Mahavira was born in one part of the country, to travel from one part of the country to the other part of the country and going back to accounts which is written by the Chinese traveler Hunat San, of which we refer in the Pallava reign, because he was there during the 600s, where he spent about 6 months to 8 months to even reach the Nalanda University, where he spent about 4 years and then traveled back to China and spent another 16 years. Traveling the length and breadth of time, people travel took 6 months. Information traveling, ability to decipher what these people look like, to try and get sculpting, to understand the chemistry of the rocks, to come up with monoliths, to understand what to use to sculpt, at what position, what angles. That is the type of research we spent time in. And then we said, let's bring out information which is not yet available. So this particular chapter will take you to that. And then we have put out the information which is available here. And there are some links to the Duke School of Archaeology, where those particular documents are, where we put it some YouTube watch list as well on that, which is all available. And if you look at this particular map, this was the Silk Route as they talk about. If this is the route that takes you one full journey like this, is recorded to have taken something like no less than 8 months. So that's a kind of type of revisiting history and the continents that we spoke about. Back to you. Questions?
Yeah, so very interesting. I'm sure you must have, traveled to a whole lot of places. Any specific monument that you really liked in general? I understand it's pretty hard to pick one, but just to name one or two.
So Mahabalipuram is one place where our hearts go out to, because you find some unbelievably brilliant monolith structures there. And then the second, so this is literally some of the places where we traveled. So this is literally coming out of our travel map. So we did Mahabalipuram, which is the core, and the second one was Kanchipuram. Interestingly, when we found the rock cut temples, so these are two big locations. So if you look at the type of inscriptions which we found were 22, and interesting, Kanchipuram is literally about almost 80 kilometers from the nearest seashore. And if I were to tell you that the Pallavas, actually cartography was way too advanced even by 2000 or 2500 BC, because that's all available from the excavations which have been done, whether it is in the Harappa time, and there is a lot of installations which we found in Madurai. Interestingly, from Pondicherry, if you go north, you will find Mahabalipuram. But then Kanchipuram is nowhere near a sea coast. But there is a particular tributary of a river, which is what takes you to Kanchipuram. And Pallavas actually used water as their primary way of travel. So if you look at all the monuments that we have written here, out of these 22 monuments that we covered in this, where we found temple inscriptions from copper plates and also the rock cut, we visited about 17 of them. And what astounded us was Mahabalipuram. And like Vignesh said, after the tsunami, when actually the low tide receded, they found 3 temples. And those 3 temples were 1 kilometer along the sea, into the sea. And we don't know how many more are there. So Mahabalipuram and Kanchipuram, these two stand out.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So, well, in another 2 minutes, we can start and we can open the session and we can start taking questions. But I think the way we can do this nicely would be if you raise your hands and I can just ask each of you to come up with your questions. So before that, I'll just ask Ram or Vignesh that this is your volume 1, right? And it's too early to ask what's going to be in volume 2. But what I would really love to know is how restrictive is volume 1? Like, are we just getting a glimpse of different types of Pallavas here, or we're just getting a glimpse of the origin of, the history? So
let me take that first, and then I'll pass it on to Vignesh. So just for keeping records very straight, 75% of the book that is written here is done by Vignesh. I just lent him support and claimed the name as well. So to answer your primary question, we have just picked up the tip of the iceberg. In this particular book, we have reading pages would be about 160 to 180. We have volume 2, where our research has already taken us to 350 pages. And there we dig deep into every Pallava across 42 of the rulers, going back from 280 CE all the way to 912, 915 CE, which was the last of the Pallavas when Cholas just completely destroyed them and then took over. And then there is some part of Pallavas which goes to 275 BC. So we have touched those lightly. So 350 pages, hopefully, I don't know whether we want to call it volume 2 or volume 3, but we've just started skimming. Vignesh.
Thank you very much for the credit. But as he said, actually, yeah, 75% of the book I did write, but the material is basically which is responsible for this great book, because frankly, I would like to thank Mr. Nilakanta Shastri for the legacy that he left us. And we are just following in his footsteps, in his great footsteps. And they're too big, to fill, but we are trying our level best. And as Mr. Ram said, yes, this is just the tip of the iceberg, because you see, the dynasty that we are dealing with is not your average dynasty, because a lot of their history is not just domestic, but it's also overseas. Now, the thing about the Pallavas is we cannot compare them to any other dynasty, because I would be audacious to say that they were the first of their kind, because I do not know any other dynasty which has basically sourced its ruler from foreign lands. Now, I do not, since there is no real comparison, I do not know how many of you have seen Game of Thrones, but if you have seen Game of Thrones, you would have seen, numerous foreign lands in that universe. It's a very colorful land where, there are civilizations which are beyond the main continent. So basically, just like that, this is very much real. I'm not making this up. This is not fantasy. The Pallavas, basically, their main civilization, even though it was situated in Kanchipuram in South India, these guys had an influence on an entire continent, like the whole part of Southeast Asia today. It has Hinduism, it has Hindu beliefs. It's all because these guys played a major role in spreading that belief. And frankly speaking, I just can't imagine how they undertook that voyage in those times. But they not only undertook those voyages, but they also set up, trading outposts to establish links. And they established political relations, civil relations, again, there's too much to say and too little time. So I would actually ask you guys to, refer to the book for more. Thank you very much.
Just to add one more point before Swapnil, you go to the question. To the line of influence that our Pallavas had, and again, this might address a few of the questions as to why Pallavas first. So about 2 weeks back, we had Ugadi, Gudi Padwa, the Tamil New Year, which was all celebrated within a gap of 48 hours. And then, of course, it has Baisakhi, which is basically the Punjabi New Year. But if you think about Pallavas ruling from the eastern coast of India, the New Year is the same for Orissa, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Philippines, Indonesia, Bali, Sumatra, Malaysia, Cambodia. The beautiful part is all these were outposts which Pallavas first set up. And actually in one of the chapters, maybe one of those questions when we come up, when Vignesh spoke about foreign lands, think about succession planning that these guys thought about from a management perspective. When the Pallava reign became headless in 731 CE, their ancestry had already set up a parallel empire in Cambodia. So the kings closest, what you call as the Navratnas, they identified and tracked that 300 years back, from the second generation, what they call as Kadavas, they went to travel from Nagapatnam and Mahabalipuram, or Mahamallapuram as they call it, to Cambodia to request the king to take over Pallavas, or hand, at least for the next of lineage, one of their sons to come in and be the king. The fourth son, who goes on to become Nandivarman II, was crowned as a king when he was at the age of 12 or 14, and that's something which basically historians debate about. But think about it. 1, doing succession planning. 2, identifying the family tree for the last 300 years in a time and place when there is no internet, no mobile, no communications, traveling to that location, requesting the king, and then having those particular functions to bring them back. Now think about it. If you figure out that there is no king in a particular place for more than 2 days, if it was the Indian scenario, you will have possibly the Article 356 and President's Rule extended. These people were able to keep that as a secret while they are planning to get this particular inscriptions, which later on reveal. And now the inscriptions were written maybe 20 years after Nandivarman II was crowned king. And he goes on to rule from the age of 12 till the age of possibly 74 or 75. So 732 to 796. So we tried to dig into this. In the process, what I requested Vignesh is he also attended a 5-week program on decoding the Pallava Grantha and the ancient Tamil to try and read it. We actually read about 2 lines of the Pallava Granthas, which is included in one of the inscriptions. And we have actually put that inscription out there in one of the chapters as well. So back to you, Swapnil. And
Okay,
one more
wonderful.
point before we start. So you said, is there a book 2 and book 3? So we actually started writing. So I started writing this book, I Have a Dream. And from there, it took me to my temples. And then it went on to these 108 Karanas. And that's the time you met us at the Library of Congress. And then we actually started putting a timeline. And this is literally like all finance people, right? I started using an Excel sheet. And we traced timeline to do parallel tracking of these particular dynasties. So we have tracked about from 270 AD to 1350 AD. These are the few people, or rather the kingdoms that we chose. So we have written for every 10 years, which king ruled where, whom did he fight. So we have tracked Pallavas, Cholas, Pandyans, Cherans, Chalukyas. We actually did not think about Chalukyas, but then Chalukyas influence a lot of Pallavas. So we added that too. So that's one more book. And then we broke down Pallavas. We thought we'll do just 100 pages. That's now 2 books. Cholas, Pandyans, Cherans, Chalukyas, and then we're doing contemporary, which is a timeline. So it's going to take a lot of effort and research, but yes, we'll come back to it. Over to you.
Wonderful, wonderful, Ram. Thank you. And we'll keep you busy. And I believe this is just the beginning of the list and not the end of that. So we'll take questions. And the first hand is, I see. Okay, I'll throw it to you, Aarti. And okay, for questions, it's okay to ask question in any language, but if it's in any other language that you all know, I request
Hindi is
Ram
good.
and Vignesh, to please, translate and let us know what that question was and answer that in common language. Okay, so Aarti, your question. Thank you. So let me tell everyone again. So Aarti is she's an environment journalist and a filmmaker, and she's also a 2-time recipient of a prestigious Ramnath Goenka Award for journalism in India. Aarti, thank you. Swagat hai aapka. Thanks, Aarti.
Thank you, Swapnil. Namaskar. Hello, Ram and Vignesh. Great presentation about Mahabalipuram, Kanchipuram. I have visited Mahabalipuram once, so it was like a down memory lane journey for me. I wanted to ask that, did you observe some rainwater harvesting practices, particularly in Mahabalipuram?
Yes. And the details of that is also recorded in some of the nuggets that we basically found, which is not included in this book. So in Mahabalipuram, the rain harvesting is basically taken on a very, very big scale. In modern times, it goes back to something like 2008, 2009, when Jayalalitha, as a chief minister, promoted it big time. And they have taken it literally to the letter and done that. In fact, we visited two of our cousins who stay on the OMR road, which is Mahabalipuram, and it's about 20 kilometers before Mahabalipuram, and their building where they stay. And in fact, it's important to know that when you do rain harvesting, you don't need to invest more than your passion and wanting to use recycled water and pure water as it is. So we found at least two of the buildings in the old Mahabalipuram road which had that, and in Mahabalipuram there were two places where basically these are being covered. And interesting, Artiji, you were talking about this. So we are doing a physical book launch at Mahabalipuram in the Mahabalipuram resort, which is half a kilometer from the monuments. I will send you all the invite. And that happens to be, my niece is getting married on the November 7th and 8th. So I'm actually piggy riding that. So there should be about 350 to 400 people. And a few of our friends here, whoever wants to join in, that's great. Something which we forgot. This book is also being written, and it's parallelly also written in Tamil. And one of my friends who's on this particular show called Harsh Modi, he's a professor at the NM College in Bandra. He is working with two of the groups, which is called Iti Sanskriti. So he does a lot of work with Gaushalas, and I've basically been supporting him. 16 of his friends are actually translating this into Marathi, Hindi, and Gujarati. So in those three languages, we think those will be out maybe later this year or early next year. So yes, Mahabalipuram rain harvesting, big time.
Thank you.
Swapnil.
Yeah. So more questions, please. This is open to everyone. And in the meanwhile, it will be nice if everybody keeps themselves mute. And Arthi, you have more questions, feel free to ask.
Swapnil, you've got Surya who's got his hand raised. You've got Anindya. You have Srinivas, Iranki.
Okay, so yeah, Rambai, it's I can't see anyone raise their hands, but if you see anyone, just please call the name to Rambai.
Surya.
Yeah, okay. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I mean, I would like to take up from the introductory talk that Vignesh had given. There is still a lot of confusion on the origin and the end of the dynasty, etc. But I did find a bit of contradictions. I'm not sure. I have not read the entire book. I've started reading it, and it's difficult on the first read to register the name or find the lineages, etc. But what I found interesting was, now if you consider, I don't know, Sivavarman or whatever it is, he was between 575 to 600 CE. He was a Buddhist. He was succeeded by his son Mahendravarman, who was a practicing Jain, who was succeeded by probably Narasimhan Varman I, who built temples, Hindu temples in Mahabalipuram. So, what exactly was happening at that time? How could three continuous generations practice different religions, and if it was the same lineage? Am I missing out something here?
No, you're not missing out anything. It is so important because we covered this in one of the earlier chapters. So what we found is, if you go to the primary Kailasanatha temple in Kanchipuram, that is a Shiva temple. But when you basically start digging a bit further, you will find that Jainism was already prevalent by the earlier Pallavas. So when they started with earlier Pallavas to be already Buddhists, to be Jains, from Jainas they went into Shaivism, and from Shaivism it went into Vaishnavism. And then we covered one of the particular chapters which you will find interestingly, and let me see.
Request everybody to mute, please.
One of the pieces that we found here is that
Ram, I think you'll have to ask everybody to mute. Yeah. We can't hear you.
Hey, whoever is not speaking, can you please go on mute?
I'm not mute. Oh,
Aishwarya.
Aishwarya ji, if you could please mute yourself. Thank you very much.
So what we
Yeah,
did is
go on, Ram.
we found out that one of the particular parts, and I wanted to just cover, let me just take you. In fact, I wanted to show you the particular monument because that will be interesting to see what really is happening here. So uncovering the Pallava legend. Was it here? Yes. So if you go to any of the earlier kings who basically had built such monolith rock temples, as they call it, they always had three different entrances to this. Apart from the fact that in each of them, there was a Shiva, there was a Vishnu, and in some of them, we also found a Brahma. So the same dynasty was possibly secular in modern day context of what the Indian constitution would call it. So they primarily started with Jainism, and the successful ones went on to Shaivites, and Shaivites was more between 570 to 668. And then you will find that the later ones went into Vaishnavism. So there are temples which are built in Kanchipuram, which are both within a distance of 2.5 kilometers. You will find Kailasanatha temple, which is primarily for Shiva. And then you will find a Vaikunta Perumal temple, which is a hardcore Vaishnavite, built over maybe just 2 generations. So it's not a contradiction. We found that possibly they assimilated as they went along and went with what was possibly the sentiment that they attached themselves to. And you'll find this similarly in Khajuraho. In fact, the book that I'm writing on, we found that they oscillated between Shaivites and Vaishnavites literally in the next generation. And then in the 3rd generation came back to Shaivism. So this is not unusual for these generations to go through.
Yeah, I found it here also. In fact, the guy is Jain succeeded by a Buddhist who succeeded by a Hindu, and so within the span of 2 generations, 3 generations, we had it. Another thing which is quite intriguing. I would like to put a disclaimer. I have not read the entire book, but I understand the span of the Pallavas was close to 600 years or something, or maybe more. But somewhere in between, Cholas started overtaking them, is it? Or they started expanding their dynasty and started eating away with Pallavas' area of rule, or whatever you may call it.
So interesting point, Surya. What happened is, if you look at the Pallavas itself, if you look at Wikipedia or if you look at any of the earlier books, they have pushed them into 3 different types of Pallavas. There is one particular section which starts with the early Pallavas. So the early Pallavas goes back to something like 275 BC. But their geographical reign that they had would have been more constrained to places in Telangana, which is alongside the Godavari River. And that's a very small belt. We found it is more like 35 to 40 square kilometers. But then remember, they started early, and there are some couple of rock cut monuments again talking about that. And the beauty is these people have left very bold political statements, which is on stone and on copper plates, which we found. So technically, if you look at where did their reign start, it was something like 275 BC. Where did it literally end was about 910, 912, but there was also gaps in between. And then where does Chola come in between? So Cholas were feudatories of the Pallavas, and then they became the masters and then vanquished the Pallavas and then went on to rule. Remember, Pallavas had Cholas as their generals who fought wars for them. But around the 700 to 800, around 775, 800, Pallavas has started getting into the decline mode. And then the Cholas had started getting into the mode which they have increased. In fact, I met 2 of my friends in Archaeological Society of India in Chennai, and we had a detailed account which is documented for 47,400 monuments and temples, which are more than 1,000 years old. 47,400. That's a big number. And out of that, Choras possibly have done about 700 to 800. Pallavas, we know and we found traces of about 42 of them. But think about it, then who built the others? So there is more that needs to be found. There is more that needs to be done. So you'll find that Pallavas and Cholas. And then what happened is when Cholas could not take over some particular places in Kerala, the northern part of Kerala, or more the Koilan and those places, what did they do? They just intermarried into the Cheran family. So the Cheran became Choras. And there is also stories around the Pallavas marrying the Choras. So you'll find that this story goes very intertwined. It's almost like the big 10-year episode which happened on English television and possibly even on the Indian television, where you find, what is that? Kyunki Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahuti, or whatever the number of characters that you can think about in that. That just episode just keeps going on and on and on.
So I have a question. So what about the Pandya's king? Like there's like a there's this whole city is actually inside the sea, which is Pumbukar, it's close to the Sangam period. Do you have any information on that?
So that's one more research that we started working on. So if you're looking at the Pandyans were restricted to a small place which is around Madurai. And if you look at Madurai, so Madurai technically should have no sea, right? But if you look at Chidambaram, the temple Chidambaram is about 12 kilometers from Madurai. And from 40 kilometers from Madurai, if you start going towards the seashore, you'll find a lot of details which comes in from, again, from the Sangam period. We went into some particular astro-related pieces, which is basically trying to understand the archaeological finds around that. And we went to Kilamedu as well in Madurai. Interestingly, the type of time period that you're talking about from Sangam, the recorded events of what is available, there is more to be decoded than available. So the Pumpuhar part of it, not much of it has been available in the public domain. There is some particular validated details which is being done by the Archaeological Society of India. I actually contacted one of our friends' dad, who happens to be Dr. Nagaswamy, who was a Padma Vibhushan last year, and he's actually done tremendous work on this archaeology-related part. In fact, even he couldn't throw light on it. So I think there are still emerging stories as we talk.
The reason I asked, because that Pumbukar was considered one of the ancient trade port, which connected all over the most part of the world.
Point here is there is some particular theories around that, but I do not have enough information to tell you. So if you look at the particular ports around the time periods, which is more like, 1000 BC or 2000 BC, you will find places like Nagapatnam, places like Mahabalipuram or Mamallapuram. Those were the big trading ports for the Pallavas, from where they took voyages, which went eastwards towards South Asia. And if you look at, even if you go today to Vishakhapatnam, and if you go to parts of Orissa, there is a particular festival which they basically conduct, and that is called, in Vishakhapatnam, it is called the Bali Yatra. And if you go to Orissa, it is called the Kartik Purnima. So technically, what is Kartik Purnima? Kartik Purnima was the first of the months after the monsoons. So if you look at the pattern of V-shaped India, on the east coast of India, you have the winter leaves, which basically bring in rains. And the moment the monsoons are over, the movement of the winds are more towards the east. So on the Kartik Purnima, after the monsoons, the sailors would take their ships and sail towards the east. And the day they leave, they would basically be doing it on a full moon night. And that is why Kartik Purnima is always celebrated on the full moon. And the beauty is, today, in a symbolic gesture, if you go to parts of Orissa, you will find that Kartik Purnima day, they would find children would basically make paper boats and lit diyas inside them, and then they will set it along the water. That is one big significance. So Pumpuhar could have possibly assumed such level of significance and importance. So that's some of the two pieces. And Pumpuhar pretty much is more to be found. So hopefully when we dig up more on the Pandyas, and I hope to catch up with some of the Archaeological Society team members in the trip that I do during November. Hopefully all of us are vaccinated, everything is good, and that's a type of hope for us.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a whole unexplored city.
Thank you for your question. Yeah, please, Jay, ask.
Yeah, I told thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. So Dr. Jay Prasad, by the way, is a virologist at Johns Hopkins University here. And I'm very impressed, someone who is a scientist has great interest in the areas of history. Thank you. Okay, more questions, please.
Anindya Mukherjee. I think I can see the raised hand. And then we have got Srinivas Eranki. Anindya, if you're not in, Srinivas, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Yeah, sure, Ram. I think first, great congratulations to both of you, Vignesh and Ram. I think you're really taken a humongous task, and all the very best. And we are really very proud that you're doing such a great work. So quickly coming to the points, I think I had three simple questions. They're very, very basic, since I'm novice in history and a lot of things, and I hope to learn from these books. The first is that what is Pallavas? When is Pallavas, is it a clan or is it a family? How do you define? You're talking about generations, centuries. So my first question is that, is it that, how do you define a Pallava? The second question is, every great kingdom, be it Mauryas or be it Cholas or be it Marathas, or they always get recognized by one particular trait among many. They have many facets. So if you have to pick up from Pallavas, which aspect of it would you like to pick up? Is it architecture? Is it religion? Is it their trade? Or is it their valor? So that is my second question. And the third question is, how did you structure? I just started reading the first book, what you released. You have blogs, you have story, and you have nuggets. So I mean that how you expect us to read and assimilate the book.
Okay, so I'll take the first question. I'll pass the second question to Vignesh and then chime in as along with that. So who are the Pallavas? So when you look at the Pallavas going back to the 280 BC, they would be more like chieftains of a small place, which is more like 30 to 40 square kilometers. But considering the time slots and the time that you're talking about, they were to be deemed as tribes or kingdoms. As they expanded their influence in terms of time and scope, going from 280 to going up to say 900 to 912, just to give you the length and spread where they've dug and put rock cut temples. So the rock cut temples are about 22 that we identified, and those 22 are spread from Telangana Godavari River belt point to Mahabalipuram to Pondicherry to Trichy. So we're talking about a 375 kilometer as a crow flies. It took us something like 14 hours to try and cover the length and breadth of that, combinations of trying to start from Chennai, go literally northwest, and then go south or southwest. Yeah, that's right. So to think that somebody should be called more than just a tribes person, kingdoms, if you look at in 1947, when the 573 princely states came into the Indian Union, Junagadh was considered a kingdom. The Nizam of Hyderabad was considered a kingdom. And then if you look at Hyderabad, it's possibly about 200 to 250 kilometers length and breadth. What do you call people who had basically monuments which stretches from Godavari going up to Trichy? We're talking about 350 kilometers as a crow flies. They possibly deserve a place more than kings. So that's the answer to the first question. Contribution of the Pallavas, and maybe if I lost my train, Srini, just chime in. We're talking about what is their contribution to arts, culture, monuments, and what impressed us. Would that be complete as a second question?
That's right. You also talked about their trade, their expansion to large geographic spread, and you also talked about their valor. I mean, so yes, there are multiple aspects of. So which one would you like to pick up?
Okay, so I'm going to.
Religion.
So Vignesh, I think you're possibly more equipped to handle the part of valor. Maybe you can give one example of where you have referred to what wars they fought, what revenge they took, and then we'll talk about the trade part once you finish that. So over to you, Vignesh.
Thank you very much. Now, when it comes to valor, I would not exactly call the Pallavas only valorous kings. Now, these kings were also very intelligent when it came to warfare, and possibly they had one of the best revenge sagas of all times also. Now, actually, what happens is one such story goes that uh, the capital of the Chalukyas is actually called Badami, whereas for the Pallavas, they call it Vatapi. Now, there's a reason, there's a very specific and a very beautiful reason why they call it Vatapi, because due to some circumstances, due to some misunderstood circumstances between the Chalukyas, who are a Deccan empire, that is the Chalukyas of Badami, and the Pallavas of Kanchipuram, you see, the emperor of the Chalukyas invaded Kanchipuram and nearly laid waste to it if it wasn't for the attempts of a king named Mahendravarman. Now, Mahendravarman was a very visionary king, and he didn't exactly go to war with the Chalukyas, but he used a very early form of guerrilla warfare where he merely released skirmishes, as in he merely harassed the very large, slow-moving kingdom to buy time so that Kanchi could be fortified. Now, when the Chalukya emperor was disappointed as to, he could not impregnate Kanchi, he had to leave disappointed. But what he did was he set torch to the kingdoms around Kanchipuram, to the villages around Kanchipuram, and he laid waste to the land. This basically, it seems, hurt Mahendravarman to a great extent, and he never quite recovered from it. As in, the Pallavas were on a decline, and possibly it is one of their most darkest hours. But when it comes to his son, you see, he did not make the same mistakes that his father made. Now, this king was, they say he was so furious with this actions of the Chalukyas that he led his army. What happens is the Chalukya Empire is a very big empire, and in the latter years of the Chalukya emperor, he kind of faced difficulty in holding it together. So Narasimhavarman, who's effectively an opportunist and pretty strong also, he has been living for this day. He's been training, he has been building his armies. So when he marches on the kingdom of the Chalukyas, he basically calls the capital Vatapi, because I bet all of you would have heard the story of Agastya who digested Vatapi. You see, the demon was literally decimated in the stomach of the sage, and that's what Narasimhavarman, he compares himself to Agastya, the one who raised Vatapi completely to the ground, a demon which was completely vanquished. So he of course, he does not affect the temples, though. That is a great aspect of Narasimhavarman. He does not harm the temples, but the city was burned because what the Chalukya emperor did was, it was the act of a sore loser. So it was a befitting revenge, and it's very beautifully described also as Narasimhavarman comparing himself to sage Agastya, and the capital Vatapi being compared to Badami being compared to the demon Vatapi, which is a very important aspect of our mythology. So he describes it in a very literary, poetic, and yes, in a very destructive way also.
Okay,
Thanks.
so thank you. Yeah, so we're already like more than 1 hour on the call. So if you can take 2 more questions.
Am I audible right now?
Yes.
Yes,
please.
sorry, there was a problem with the mic.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Vignesh a question. I've gone through the gist presented over here, and like, if Nandivarman was a foreigner, how did he win over the indigenous Pallava subjects? Can you elaborate on that, please?
Oh, actually, that's a very good question, Anandya. The thing is, yes, Nandivarman was a foreigner, but effectively his bloodline, he was a part of the branch family which did hail originally from Kanchipuram. So yes, Nandivarman, who is a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old boy, when he did land on the shores of Mahabalipuram, he did have an arduous task ahead of him to unite his subjects under one king, whereas he also had to deal with several other elements like a rival claimant to the throne. Well, actually, for one, the thing is, the war with the Chalukyas had practically hurt the financial interest also of the Pallavas. So what happens is, since the Pallavas also had overseas interests, they supported numerous merchant guilds who had the money to bankroll their dynasty. So what Nandivarman does at first is he appeals to the merchant guilds, who I would actually compare, like, to the Iron Bank of Bravos in Game of Thrones. Because you see, if the merchant guilds who are bankrolling the Pallavas are effectively a subcontinental entity. They had interest in Cambodia, in Thailand, in Maldives, in Malaysia also. So Nandivarman happens to come from such an area where an outpost already did exist. So he had to make peace with them, and he needed to assure them that they would get their financial rewards for supporting him to the throne. And when it comes to his subjects, I believe they had already chosen him as their king, because they frankly did not want the claimant, the person who they had on the throne at that point of time. So they went out of their way to source a prince from a foreign land, asked him to cross the entirety of the Bay of Bengal, got him to Kanchipuram, and crowned him king. So I believe he had it good with his subjects, but when it came to the merchant guilds, yes, he did have to undertake numerous financial measures. He had to assure them that they would get, I would say in layman terms, their money back for betting on him. So yeah, that's an answer. Thank you very much
Thanks
for
a
the
lot
question.
for the explanation. Thanks.
Thank you. So if we can have one final question for the day.
Okay, if I can take that to just.
Yes, sir. Yes, please.
Firstly, as we all know, it's a great job done. But quickly, Ram and Vignesh, was there, how was the trade happening? Was there any currency? Was it barter? Was it coins? Or how do they normally used to trade the Pallavas? How does it work there in those days?
Again, super question. Now, the thing is, I bet you must have heard of the East India Company, as in how it came to India, how it set up its initial trading posts with India, and how basically what the Pallavas initially did was, you see, their coinage is very distinctive. It has icons which are very unique just to the Pallavas of Kanchi. But in the past, they have already established outposts in Southeast Asia. And Southeast Asia being, I'm not saying it's underdeveloped, but it was a rather fragmented area which was inhabited by very small kingdoms. Now, what the Pallavas did was, whether it was knowingly or unknowingly, their currency basically functioned like the dollar does today. Because numerous those kingdoms which were so impressed by what the Pallavas did for them in terms of trade, in terms of religion, in terms of even welfare. Yes, the Pallavas did introduce certain welfare measures, because I know it was for trade, but they had to develop also that area. And as I said, the merchant guilds which originated under the like, for example, there's a merchant guild called the Ainuravar, which is the 500 of Aihole. Now, what these merchant guilds did were, when they set up their outposts, they also set up administrative units. Now, these these wouldn't last forever. They were just temporary measures. These were just measures to basically get the foreigners in Southeast Asia on a good term with the Pallavas. And what happens is, since the coinage in those days was effectively metal, as in it's not just paper currency, so the Pallavas are also open to getting currency from the other kingdoms. But if you see the coins which are found in and around the areas where the Pallavas ruled, many of them look like Pallava coins, but they're not. They're very similar. In fact, some historians state that possibly they are Southeast Asian coins, which are minted in the image of the Pallava coins. So when they establish such deep trade links, I would say their currency and their trade relations worked a long way to keeping their influence in the region and ensuring that they filled their coffers, and it also ensured the stability of their empire, because they were not colonialists. They were effectively what we call political influencers. So yeah, if that answers the question.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Ram, you mute. Ram, you're still mute. We can't hear you. Okay. Ram, can you please unmute yourself so that we can hear you properly?
What?
Okay, so there's some problem with Ram's connection here, and this is such a wonderful session today. And now it's time to call off the session. And thank you very much for joining. Now, as I eagerly wait to hold the copy of the Pallavas of Kanchipuram Volume 1 in my hand, I wish Ram and Vignesh best of luck. And we can't wait to read more of their writings in the future. Thank you very much. And
excuse me, Mr. Swapnil. Sorry.
yes, Vignesh, please.
Guys, what I would like to also say as a concluding remark is that when it comes to the architecture of the Pallavas, these are very, very intricate details which the Pallavas basically took a great deal of effort and time into establishing. So if they can actually, establish such great monuments with great efforts, I bet, we can also lend a hand to them, so that we can spread their message for posterity. And I would also like to add that the image which you see on the cover page is made by my sister Aishwarya Ganesh. So thank you very much, Aishwarya, if you're there in the meeting. We could not have gotten such a good image without you. So thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
No.